Get ready to question everything you thought you knew about space exploration. The email arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning in March 2027, wedged between spam and job alerts Silas Rock usually ignored. He nearly deleted it without a glance. Just another phishing attempt, he figured. But the subject line gave him pause. Immediate contract opportunity. Devon Island Geological Survey. Devon Island. Just seeing the name sent a strange chill down his spine. It wasn't fear exactly, more like something deep and unsettled stirring beneath the surface. For the past 5 years, Silas had worked as a remote imaging analyst, poring over satellite data for various aerospace contractors. His days were a blur of high-risk terrain maps and spectral readings, most of places no human had ever or would ever set foot. He'd grown skilled at spotting what didn't belong, a slight shadow where there shouldn't be one, a pattern that didn't quite line up. It was a gift his supervisor simultaneously respected and resented. His last job had ended in silence. After questioning inconsistencies in orbital photos, he was quietly removed from the project. No explanation, no follow-up, just a final paycheck and a vague NDA. Now, this offer. The email was from a Dr. Kieran Solvey, Director of Field Operations at Vulstry Dynamics. Silas had heard of the company, an elite NASA subcontractor known for its Mars mission prep work. They were the real deal. The kind of organization that didn't show up in your inbox unless someone somewhere had vouched for you. The contract details were almost too good. 3 months on Devon Island in the Canadian Arctic, geological surveys, high pay, all expenses covered. A short-term job in the middle of nowhere might have sounded awful to most, but for Silas, it felt like salvation. After months of unemployment and creeping desperation, the timing was perfect. He read the email 3 times before responding. By Friday, he was packed and boarding a flight to Resolute Bay, Nunavut, the last sliver of civilization before the edge of the known world. The final leg of the journey was aboard a small charter plane, seating only 8. Silas was quiet during boarding, observing the others. A young biologist introduced herself as Tulia Miro, restless hands, warm eyes, soft voice. She seemed friendly, but tightly wound. Then there was Dr. Solvey, tall and unreadable, who offered only a nod when spoken to. The rest were technicians focused, insular mumbling about signal shielding and data latency. Their words weren't meant to be overheard, but Silas caught fragments anyway. Enough to wonder. As the plane dipped below the clouds, Silas pressed his forehead to the window. What he saw made his breath catch. The world below looked wrong. Familiar but wrong. The land was scarred, pockmarked with ancient craters and dusted in red-brown sediment. There were no trees, no wildlife, no color. Really, beyond the rust of exposed rock and the gray-blue shimmer of permafrost. It looked exactly like Mars. No, it looked too much like Mars. The landing strip wasn't even paved. Just a flat stretch of dirt carved into the landscape. But surrounding it was something else entirely: infrastructure. High-tech, clinical, almost militarized. A dozen black shipping containers laid out in geometric symmetry, each linked by thick cables. Tall antennas swept the horizon. Drones buzzed overhead in coordinated patterns, each one silently tracking them as they stepped off the plane. "Welcome to Mars," Dr. Solvey said without a hint of irony as he stepped onto the tundra, lips twitching into the barest smile. "You'll be calling this home for the next 3 months." Silas blinked. He had expected, "Welcome to Devon Island," or maybe, "Welcome to the Arctic." But Mars? It felt like more than just a metaphor. Their initial briefing took place in a heated module, another modified container, though this one felt like a command center. Inside, maps lined the walls, monitors blinked with live feeds, and portable labs hummed with quiet energy. Dr. Solvey stood at the head of a long metal table, flanked by mission leads. "Our mission is straightforward," he began. "You'll Be collecting samples, documenting geological features, testing field equipment for extreme environments. Everything we do here simulates conditions we might one day encounter on Mars. Standard enough, Silas thought. But then came the protocols. No. Personal phones. Every form of communication had to be routed through secure, encrypted tablets issued by Volstry. Internet access was restricted to approved scientific databases only. There was no open browser, no email, no news. And stranger still, radio silence. Enforced for several hours each day, without explanation. When Silas asked about it, Sovi barely blinked. Security protocols, he said flatly. We're testing sensitive instruments. Can't risk interference. It felt like a rehearsed line. Like something he'd said before, many times, in the same exact way. That night, Silas lay in his bunk, listening to the Arctic wind scream. Across the frozen landscape, his sleeping quarters were modest but comfortable. Another container retrofitted into a dormitory. 2 bunk beds, a tiny desk, a curtain for privacy. He shared the room with one of the technicians who barely spoke, and turned in early. Snoring softly by 9 p.m., Silas stared at the ceiling, the hum of the heater filling the silence. There was no signal, no distractions, just the cold, the dark, and the sense that something about all this was very carefully controlled. He thought about the photos he'd questioned back at his old job, about the shadows that didn't make sense, the light sources that didn't line up, the terrain that matched no known Earth geography until now. Devon Island wasn't just a training ground. It was a copy, and suddenly he wasn't sure if they were simulating Mars, or if they were hiding it. Completely cut off from the outside world, Silas sat by the narrow window of his sleeping quarters, staring into the dark. The communication towers blinked quietly in the distance, their lights pulsing in strange sync, casting an eerie rhythm into the black, starless sky. It should have felt comforting, proof that the camp was still connected to something, someone, but instead, it felt like a signal looping endlessly into the void. A whisper to no one, something about this place was off. Not just the isolation, not just the cold. It was deeper than that, an unshakable tension beneath the silence, like a breath held too long. The first week passed in a blur. Days were packed with geological surveys, equipment calibration, soil sampling. Silas spent most of it partnered with Talia Miro, the field biologist. She was sharp, calm under pressure, and meticulous in her observations. Her specialty was extremophiles, organisms that survive in harsh, alien-like conditions. NASA hoped similar life could exist on Mars. She approached her work with quiet intensity, jotting notes with a kind of reverence. It was Talia who noticed the first inconsistency. "Hey," she said one afternoon, crouching beside a wide patch of reddish soil. "Have you looked at these tracks?" They were near a simulation site NASA had marked for future rover exercises. Silas joined her and followed her gaze. The ground bore crisscrossing tire patterns, overlapping in looping arcs. But the way the trails weaved, doubling back, intersecting, circling, looked deliberate, purposeful. "We're not scheduled to run rover trials until next week," Silas said. "Exactly," she replied. "But these are fresh," he frowned. "Maybe they're leftover from an earlier mission?" Talia shook her head, her voice low. "Look at the edges, sharp tread definition. There was a windstorm 4 days ago, enough to wipe clean any surface. Marks." She bent closer, gently brushing dust away from one of the prints. "These couldn't be older than 48 hours, max." Silas pulled out his issued tablet and accessed the internal records. According to the mission logs, no rover had operated on Devon Island in over 6 months. Nothing had been recorded, not even calibration tests. "That doesn't make sense," he muttered. "Unless someone's using the rover off schedule," Talia said, "and not reporting it." The next hour was spent photographing the tracks, taking soil samples, documenting their layout. Silas followed the pattern with his eyes, The paths weren't random, they were staged. Each arc passed by the most visually interesting formations. Sharp cliffs, unique rock striations. Places that would photograph beautifully. It wasn't exploration. It was choreography. That night, Silas couldn't let it go. While the others slept, he stayed up in the common module, tapping away at his tablet, diving into Volstry's internal system. Most of the mission history had been scrubbed clean, light references to equipment testing and topographical surveys, but no dates, no coordinates, no images. But deep within an old technical thread on the engineering forum, something odd surfaced. Post by a Volstry technician, dated 3 months ago. Just a single line before it was deleted. Still having Studio B relay drops near Northeast Ridge. Suggests signal booster. Studio B? It wasn't in any of their briefings. No one had mentioned anything by that name. The following morning, Silas slipped away during a scheduled solo sample run. He told the comms team he was headed towards Sector 9, a well within safe boundaries. Instead, he veered northeast, following a faint set of vehicle tracks partially buried under snow. They led uphill toward a rocky outcrop. After nearly 2 miles, he found it. Tucked among the boulders was a structure that didn't match anything in their base schematics. From a distance, it looked like another shipping container, but up close, it was clearly more advanced. Reinforced walls. A series of discrete ventilation units. A dish-shaped satellite array perched on a low tripod, tracking something silently across the sky. A small metal sign near the only visible door read, Studio B authorized personnel, only the door had no handle. Just a biometric scanner mounted above a keypad. When Silas stepped closer, the scanner lit up red, scanning his face automatically. Before displaying access denied in cold digital text, he backed up and circled the structure. No windows, no other entrances. The entire container had been sealed tight. The only sign of life was the low mechanical hum of ventilation fans and the steady vibration of electronics running inside. Something was happening here. Something they hadn't been told. As Silas stood there, listening to the faint buzz inside. The metal shell, a strange thought crossed his mind. What if this wasn't a simulation? What if the things they were simulating weren't simulations at all? Silas trudged back toward camp, his boots crunching through the icy terrain, the wind nipping at his exposed skin. The sky above Devon Island was a pale gray, a color that had become far too familiar. He was exhausted, but alert. Something didn't sit right with him. As he rounded the bend near Ridge 12, he paused. Mounted discreetly on a rocky outcrop was a high-resolution camera system, sleek, modern, and aimed directly at the main rover testing zone. Silas's stomach tightened. That camera wasn't on the official equipment manifest. He would know he'd memorized every piece of tech they were using. This wasn't one of them. Later that evening, he sat across from Talia in the narrow dining container. The others were busy chatting about weather patterns and generator issues, their voices muffled by the hum of the heater. Silas leaned in. "I found a camera today," he whispered, careful to keep his tone casual. "Not ours. It's positioned to watch the rover tests." Talia didn't look surprised. She wiped her mouth with a napkin, then lowered her voice. "I've been noticing things too," she said. "The comms blackouts? They always happen when the drones are flying." Silas stared. "Coincidence? I don't think so." "And yesterday," she continued, glancing around, "I saw Dr. Solvi uploading something. Not to the mission network. It was a private server one. I've never seen listed in any of the docs. What kind of files?" "Video footage. It looked like Mars rover data, but the timestamp said it was recorded right here, Devon Island." Silas felt his skin prickle. "You're saying they're faking Mars footage?" "I don't know what I'm saying," Talia replied, her eyes darting to the door. "But something's wrong here." They both sat in silence for a moment. The low clink of silverware on them suddenly eerie. "We need proof," Silas muttered. "Real evidence." Talia nodded. "But we do it quietly. We don't know who else is in on this." Their chance came a week later. A brutal storm rolled in from the northwest, smothering the island in white. Visibility dropped to near zero, and the winds howled like something alive. The team was confined indoors for nearly 2 days, camped out in the heated modules with board games and stale coffee. But storms had a silver lining. Security protocols were loosened. The drone flights were suspended, and the usual network restrictions were down. The isolation had a crack in it. At 2 a.m., when everyone was asleep and only the wind screamed outside, Silas slipped out of his bunk. He dressed in layers, double-checked. The keycard in his glove pocket, lifted earlier from Dr. Solvi's jacket during a conveniently timed act of help, and stepped into the storm. Snow blasted against his goggles. Each step felt like a fight. The air was bitterly cold, and the wind shoved him sideways. Still, he pushed on, one foot after the other, trudging toward the dark silhouette of Studio B. Through the swirling snow, the building appeared a squat metal container, barely visible, but unmistakably out of place. Its biometric scanner glowed red like an eye. Silas held his breath and swiped the keycard. The scanner beeped. A soft green flash. The lock disengaged with a heavy click. He stepped into a dimly lit airlock chamber. After a moment, the inner door hissed open. Silas froze. Inside was nothing like he expected. The cramped metal walls gave way to a spacious interior. Cameras, boom arms, and lighting rigs lined the perimeter. In the center was a massive green screen, dome at least 40 feet across, encasing a perfect replica of a Mars landscape. Artificial red soil, rocks, dust patterns that mimicked wind erosion. And in the middle of it all, a rover, not a test model. A fully built, camera-equipped, scientifically detailed rover. It looked exactly like the one they'd been testing outside down to the decals. Silas's heart pounded in his ears. He moved slowly toward a nearby workstation. The monitors showed live feeds angles of the rover from multiple perspectives. But this wasn't internal documentation. These feeds were being uploaded in real time to NASA's public servers, with official mission headers and embedded timestamps. His eyes flicked to a thick binder on the desk. The title made his stomach drop. Script SOUL 3247. He opened it. Dozens of pages, neatly tabbed and color-coded. Pre-written Twitter posts from the Mars rover account. Carefully crafted malfunction scenarios complete with emotional beats and projected audience reactions. Pages of discovery moments, detailing when and how to simulate groundbreaking geological finds. There was even a section titled Public Sentiment Index Real Time, social media metrics tracking the emotional engagement of followers. And then, the directive, bold, underlined, in red ink. Maintain public interest through curated content. Control the narrative. Do not break immersion. The illusion must hold. Silas sat back, his mouth dry. His hands trembled. They weren't just faking science. They were faking history. Earpieces, moving quickly and without speaking. Their movements were rehearsed, mechanical, like they'd done this 100 times before. Silas crouched lower behind a snow-dusted ridge, heart hammering. He could feel the weight of everything he'd uncovered pressing on his chest. They weren't just faking data inside a studio. They were actively simulating outdoor rover movement, crafting an illusion so complete that no one back home would ever suspect it was all a performance. He snapped a few more photos through his binoculars, zooming in on the crew. They wore unmarked cold weather gear, but he recognized one of them, Dr. Volkov, supposedly in charge of drone operations. Another familiar face was Bryce, the logistics officer. Both had been on the original project briefing team. If they were in on it, how far up did this go? He made his way back toward camp carefully, using the snow and jagged rocks as cover. The wind had picked up again, howling across the open terrain, but Silas barely felt the cold now. All he could think about were the words he'd read in those files: narrative maintenance, public sentiment engineering, asset retrieval. The last one haunted him the most. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Silas lay awake staring at the thin metal ceiling above his bunk. The hum of the generator was constant, like a heartbeat. His thoughts spiraled. Was he already under suspicion? Had they seen him enter Studio B? He couldn't shake the image of those earpieces, the synchronized movements. These weren't just scientists, they had training. This wasn't just science, it was theater, propaganda, and possibly something much worse. By morning, the tension in the camp had thickened. People spoke less, moved faster. No one mentioned the storm anymore, though it still raged beyond the containers. Surveillance drones now hovered closer, no longer subtle but brazen, watching like vultures. During breakfast, Talia leaned in close again. Her voice was barely above a breath. They've installed a new system on the internal server. Keyword tracking. I couldn't even search for flight schedules without getting flagged. And my access ID was reset overnight. Silas kept his expression neutral, but his stomach turned. You think they know? He asked quietly. I don't know, but something's changed. I don't think we have much time. He pushed his tray away, appetite gone. He needed an escape plan now. Later that day, under the pretense of testing soil pH levels, Silas walked the perimeter of the main testing field. He brought the tablet with him, using it to scan samples, but also to review the data he'd stored. The files were all still there, the photos, the video logs, the script book excerpts. But the tablet was connected to the internal network, and he knew any access might be monitored. He set it to airplane mode. A short hike brought him back to the ridge near Studio B. He crouched again, this time using a higher vantage point. Sure enough, the second rover was gone, moved. But the track showed had been rolled back into the hidden entrance. They were covering their tracks, but something else caught his attention. A vehicle, military grade, with snow treads, was parked near the far edge of the site. Not standard mission equipment. And standing beside it were three figures speaking into radios, all in black gear. Silas backed away immediately. That night, Talia didn't come to dinner when he asked around. Casually, he got vague answers. Probably resting, someone mumbled. She said she wasn't feeling well, but her bunk was empty. Her coat was still hanging by the door. Silas didn't sleep. He sat up at his desk, staring at the frozen wall, tablet hidden under his mattress. The entire operation was on edge now. He knew he couldn't wait any longer. If he didn't act soon, the evidence and possibly his life would disappear into the snow. The next morning, he made his decision. He'd head to Array Station 4, just over a mile from base. It was outside the main comms grid, used only for backup and diagnostics. If he could patch into its emergency uplink, there was a chance he could push the files through a secure tunnel before anyone noticed. A long shot, but his only one. Before he left, he slipped a small flash drive into his sock. It held a copy of the most critical files. As he stepped into the cold, the sun hung low on the horizon, casting long, blood-orange shadows across the ice. The wind had died down. Everything was too still, and behind him, from the edge of the compound, he felt it, eyes watching, encrypted quarters, and into the freezing dark, careful not to trigger the motion sensors along the path to the equipment shed. The cold hit him like a slap, Arctic wind cutting through his jacket as if it weren't there. His breath came out in sharp bursts, white clouds vanishing into the blackness. Every crunch of his boots on the snow sounded too loud. He kept his head down, hood drawn, and moved with steady purpose, avoiding the main camp paths. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, adrenaline making his fingers shake as he unlocked the shed and grabbed what little he could carry. A compact thermal blanket, Emergency rations, a flare gun, a folding knife, and an old compass. Every item he stuffed into his pack felt like another second wasted. He didn't look back as he crossed the frozen plain. The sky was beginning to lighten just barely, but not with warmth, just a cold blue shimmer that made everything look more alien. Behind him, the camp remained eerily silent as he hiked northwest toward the weather station. Flashes of the last 24 hours tore through his mind. The message. The signal booster still warm in the rocks. Talia gone. And that transmission. Subject. Has accessed restricted areas. Recommend immediate containment. He could still hear those words, sterile and cold, in the synthesized voice that played through his tablet's decryption software. The term subject, not person. And asset extraction, like he was nothing more than a loose wire to be yanked out. He hadn't slept. His legs ached. Every muscle in his back screamed from the weight of the gear, and the frost was already biting at his fingertips. But he kept moving, glancing at the compass, then at the distant horizon. Somewhere out there was the weather station Talia had told him about. She'd mentioned it during one of their long walks through the icy hills, back when things still felt normal. You ever wonder how much of this is real? She had asked him once, standing over a ridge, staring at the red-tinted rocks. The mission, the footage, all of it. Too much, he'd said back then, trying to play it off. Don't ask questions like that. But she did. And now, she was gone. By 5 a.m., the sky had brightened into a pale, washed-out pink, but there was still no sign of the station. The cold had seeped deep into his gloves, numbing his hands. His lips cracked and bled every time he breathed too hard. He checked the tablet again. Still no signal. Still no update. Then, just after a snow-blasted ridge, he saw it, a faint silhouette in the distance, a slumped structure half buried in ice and snow. The abandoned weather station. Its antenna had collapsed, but the base looked intact. He broke into a limping run. The door was frozen shut. He had to pry it open using his knife, cursing under his breath as his numb fingers slipped again and again. Finally, with a groan of metal, it gave. Inside, it smelled of rust and mold. Dust covered every surface, and a thin layer of frost clung to the inside walls. He pulled the door closed behind him and immediately began searching. There was a backup generator beneath the floorboards, just like Talia had described. He opened the panel and yanked at the starter cord again and again until it finally chugged to life. Coughing smoke. Lights flickered dimly to life. Old monitors buzzed. He found the communication console and turned it on. To his disbelief, it powered up. Weak, but alive. He connected his tablet, praying that the signal could reach the satellite network. The tablet chirped softly. A faint signal appeared barely. There, but enough. He launched the upload. Talia had once joked the only thing that worked on Devon Island was the cold and satellite tech. Now, both were the only things keeping him alive. The files began to transfer. One by one, photos of Studio B, the production, logs, even the encrypted Echo Protocol documents. His entire discovery laid bare in ones and zeros. His hand trembled as he watched the progress bar creep. Forward. 25%. 40%. Then, the tablet froze. A signal interference warning blinked on screen. No, he muttered, trying to refresh the connection. Then he heard it, a distant rumble outside, the unmistakable thump of rotor blades. Helicopters. They'd found him. He dove to the floor, heart hammering. The upload ticked to 61%, paused, then resumed. He crawled to the back wall, pulled the flare gun from his bag, and waited. He didn't know what would happen next, but if he didn't make it out, someone would know. Someone would see the truth. Old Silas Rock had been wiped from history deliberately, systematically, and with terrifying efficiency. The wind had picked up again that morning when Silas left his accommodation. every step on the frozen crust of snow feeling like a gamble. The world outside was a white wasteland, sharp and howling. The thermometer on his suit had blinked minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit, but numbers didn't convey what that kind of cold felt like, how it gnawed at your face through even the best thermal lining, how it turned sweat into ice against your spine. But the weather was a blessing in disguise. No one in their right mind would try to flee in these conditions. That was what he was counting on. The weather station was even farther out than he remembered from Talia's description, hidden in the folds of snow-covered ridges like some forgotten relic of a failed expedition. When he finally spotted the structure half submerged in ice, battered by time and storms, his heart stuttered with relief. He stumbled inside, kicking snow from the entrance, and slammed the door shut behind him. The echo swallowed by layers of insulation. The interior was a mess, frost on every surface, rust along the old consoles, cables coiled like frozen snakes under broken panels. But the frame was intact, and most importantly, the backup satellite uplink was still present. A miracle in metal dot. For 4 agonizing hours, Silas worked nonstop, fingers stiff and bleeding inside his gloves. He scavenged from broken arrays, spliced wires with shaking hands, and jerry-rigged power from an old solar storage unit. It was a crude, Frankenstein-like system, but when the uplink finally powered on with a weak hum and blinking green light, he let out a gasp that nearly choked him. The connection was frail, but it was enough. He didn't waste a second. He uploaded everything: the videos, the photos of Studio B, internal logs, and decoded Echo Protocol messages. His written report was methodical, clinical, but personal, layered with timelines, testimonies, and names. He sent the files in waves, targeting trusted journalists, international science institutions, even a few government transparency committees. Then, as he began packing what little he had left, he froze. The low, unmistakable chop of helicopter rotors vibrated through the walls. He moved to the nearest window, scraping away a layer of frost with his sleeve. 2 black choppers circled low, scanning the area. Within moments, they landed simultaneously in the clearing outside. 6 figures emerged, dressed in heavy Arctic gear, masks up, moving in perfect formation. They carried rifles, non-lethal types, likely, but their posture was practiced, their steps precise. Silas backed away from the window. Then a voice, clear and amplified, cracked the cold silence. "Mr. Rock," it said through a megaphone. "This is Agent Ray Dennis with the Department of Scientific Security. We need to speak with you regarding your recent activities." Department of Scientific Security? Silas had never heard of it. But the tone was calm, professional, official, designed to disarm. "We're not here to hurt you," Dennis continued. "We want to provide clarity. There's been a misunderstanding regarding your assignment." Silas crouched low, heart pounding, his mind racing through options. Their approach wasn't brute force. It was careful, psychological. Textbook whistleblower neutralization. Make it sound reasonable. Offer answers. Make the subject doubt himself. "You've seen classified data," the voice continued, "and we understand that's unsettling. We're here to give you context, to help you see the broader picture." That was enough. He grabbed his pack and headed toward the emergency hatch. Behind the weather station, a slope dipped into a snowfield littered with large boulders. Not ideal, but the only cover for miles. He burst through the exit, feet slipping as he landed hard on the ice, then scrambled toward the rocks. His breath tore in and out of his chest. He didn't look back. 30 yards. 40. Then, a sharp sting in his right shoulder. His legs crumpled beneath him before he even hit the snow. Warmth flooded his limbs, artificial and wrong. His vision wavered as if the air itself was bending. Somewhere behind him, boots crunched closer. "Asset secured," said a voice. Agent Dennis into a radio. "Initiate memory protocol. Clean sweep authorized." Silas couldn't move. He was lifted, body limp, arms swinging uselessly. Through the fog of sedation, he saw the helicopter door open, a metal floor. The blurred ceiling lights dot, then the world vanished. 6 months later, Dr. Sarah Chun sat alone in her apartment in Toronto, watching the encrypted files load onto her laptop. They had come from an anonymous email, no sender, no metadata. Just a subject line, Devon, the truth. Inside were gigabytes of data images, documents, recordings. At first, it looked like a prank, but as she started reading, her stomach sank. Studio B wasn't just a simulation chamber. It was a Hollywood-grade fabrication zone, with set pieces mimicking Mars terrain, lighting rigs, camera tracks. Echo protocol logs showed coordination with multiple intelligence agencies. There were internal memos referencing the Perception Control Grid, a global campaign to engineer belief in Mars colonization. But when Sarah began cross-referencing the name Silas Rock, she hit nothing but dead ends. No birth certificate, no university records, no employment files at Volstrax or any other agency. She contacted people who might have worked with him. Nobody remembered him. Even Talia Morrow, listed in an early crew manifest, had disappeared 2 years earlier. Presumed drowned on a field expedition, according to a single ambiguous report. Sarah leaned back in her chair, heart pounding, the screen glowing in the dark. The data was real. The story made sense. But the man behind it, whoever he was, had been erased. As if he'd never existed at all. She opened a new file and began to write. His name was Silas Rock, and this is what they didn't want you to know. Of existence, there was nothing left, no trace, no record, not even a rumor that could hold its shape for more than a few days. Dr. Chun had spent the better part of a year chasing shadows, trying to piece together what had happened to Silas Rock. Every trail she followed crumbled into dust. Phone numbers disconnected, addresses vacated, emails bounced. And the few people who claimed to remember Silas, one by one, they recanted. I must have confused him with someone else, they said. The name sounds familiar, but no, I don't think I knew him. All that remained was the anonymous email she had received shortly after he vanished, a message that warned her to watch the next rover photos carefully. She saved the file, encrypted it, and buried it in a hidden drive. Nearly a year after Silas signed that contract for the Devon Island mission, NASA released another batch of high-resolution Mars rover photos. The press went wild. The images were breathtaking: scarlet rock valleys, wind-sculpted ridges, signs of ancient riverbeds. Headlines screamed of ancient Martian water and the possibility of microbial life. Another boost for the public's faith in the Mars program. But tucked away in the corner of one image, a corner no one would normally examine, was something deeply out of place. It was small, faded, partially buried in the dusty Martian soil. A signpost. Dr. Chun zoomed in. Ward Glacier. Knew not. Her breath caught. Ward Glacier wasn't on Mars. It was on Devon Island, in Canada's high Arctic, part of the territory of Nunat, a glacial site often used for Mars analog training missions. She stared at the image until her eyes blurred, then cross-checked it against archived topographic maps of Devon. It matched. Not perfectly, but eerily close. Millions saw the image, but almost no one noticed that sliver of truth peeking through the fiction. Those who did, dismissed. Conspiracy nuts. #theorists. The kind of people no one listens to anymore. Outlets didn't bite. Fact-checkers shut it down. Pareidolia, they said. Coincidence. And so the Mars program rolled on, its narrative untouched. Weekly updates, enthusiastic scientists, streaming mission control rooms. Humanity's next great adventure broadcast, live from a place thousands of miles away from any launch pad, and buried somewhere deep in the archives of a classified government division. A manila folder was sealed and labeled ECHO Protocol. Silas Rock, The file contained everything. A psychological profile, training history, behavioral deviations, security clearance logs, surveillance reports. Except one thing, a birth certificate. There had never been a Silas Rock. Not officially. Not anymore. Dr. Chun kept the encrypted files. Sometimes she'd lie awake at 2 a.m. and open them again. She'd scroll through the Mars photos, frame by frame, looking for more anomalies, shadows that didn't fit, landscapes that seemed a bit too familiar. She never found another sign. But she never stopped searching. The public still gazed at Mars with hope. But the truth, the real truth, was frozen under the snowdrifts of Devon Island, where red dust was shoveled over permafrost and questions were smothered before they could breathe. Mars, it seemed, wasn't farther than we thought. It was closer, but only in the most dangerous way imaginable. My name is Daniel Rhodes's. For 32 years, I worked in a world that technically didn't exist. NASA, CIA, programs so dark, they still don't have acronyms you could Google. I read things between redacted lines, monitor events no one was allowed to name. I thought retirement in 2012 would bring peace. I was wrong. March 8, 2014. I remember the date too well. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 pushed back from Gate C1 at Kuala Lumpur International Airport just after midnight. It was supposed to be a standard 6-hour hop to Beijing. Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah was at the helm, 53 years old, a quiet professional with over 18,000 flight hours. His first officer, Farik Abdul Hamid, was only 27, still learning the ropes of the Boeing 777, but competent. There were 227 passengers on board, 10 crew, men, women, children, business trips, family reunions, ordinary lives caught in an extraordinary moment. Everything proceeded normally for 38 minutes. Then at 1:19 a.m., the last official communication was made. "Good night, Malaysian 370. That calm voice was the last anyone ever heard. 2 minutes later, the transponder went dark. Malaysian radar lost the aircraft. To the world, it was as if MH370 simply evaporated into the night sky. Theories ran wild. Mechanical failure, hijacking, pilot suicide. But here's what never made it to prime time. News. MH370 didn't just vanish from Malaysian systems. It disappeared from every secondary radar system across 3 countries at once. Think about that. 3 separate nations, independent airspace monitoring systems, and a plane the size of a football field drops off all of them simultaneously. I've seen a lot of strange things, but spontaneous, synchronized radar failure across national boundaries isn't just rare. It's statistically impossible. Someone didn't just turn off a transponder. Someone turned off the sky. And I wish to hell I was speaking metaphorically. Flights over that part of the Maldives at that hour. I checked the air traffic control logs myself, cross-referenced them with publicly available flight tracking data. Nothing matched. The sky should have been empty. And yet, multiple residents, men, women, even school children, described the same thing: a large aircraft, flying unusually low, rumbling across the island as dawn broke over the ocean. One fisherman even claimed the windows were blacked out. He said it wasn't like the planes they normally saw. Said it felt wrong. By now, I couldn't sleep. I was running on caffeine, muscle memory, and a growing sense of dread. This wasn't some internet rabbit hole I had fallen into. The pieces were real. The data was real. The silence was too intentional. I went back to the Inmarsat pings. Each handshake told a story. A quiet one, hidden in digital echoes bouncing between satellites and the ocean below. Not just where the plane was, but how it moved. There were subtle changes in frequency that hinted at speed, altitude, engine power. The technical annotations I recovered annotated in margin. Notes by some nameless defense analyst pointed to deliberate control. Not automation, not autopilot. A human hand. Someone was flying MH370 for hours. So the question became, to where? And that's when Diego Garcia stopped being a fringe theory. With its mile-long runway, total electronic isolation, and limited civilian oversight, it was the only place within range that could receive an unscheduled 777 under deep cover. No questions asked because no one on the island could ask. Pulled satellite imagery from the day of the disappearance and the days after. Public images, yes, but older intel tricks taught me how to spot environmental inconsistencies. Tire tracks in sand that shouldn't be there. Heat signatures bleeding into adjacent panels. Shadow angles that didn't match the sun's position at the log time. On March 9, 2014, less than 36 hours after MH370 vanished, there were signs of recent runway activity at Diego Garcia that hadn't been logged in any flight plan or press release. A temporary hangar structure had been moved. Security perimeters had shifted. And most importantly, a radar anomaly off the southwest quadrant of the atoll showed signs of a large aircraft's approach vector. Right around 6:45 a.m., I stared at that frame for hours. It was circumstantial. It wouldn't hold up in court. But in my world, truth often lives between the pixels. And then I remembered Mitchell. He hadn't called me in over 5 years. Hadn't needed to, which made his warning all the more chilling. Stop trusting the satellite data. That wasn't about the plane. That was about the story they were telling the world. Satellite data can be doctored, so can black box readings. But the human, the witness who doesn't know he's seeing something forbidden, that's harder to erase, unless you bury the story fast enough. The residents of Kutahavadhu were silenced. The search was redirected, and Diego Garcia? It was never mentioned. Not once. Not officially. But something landed there, I'm not saying. MH370 is still there. I don't even know if it landed intact. But I'm certain of this. The plane didn't crash by accident. It was taken. It was flown. And it reached a destination that some group with resources and precision wanted it to reach. And then they buried it. They buried it so well that governments, agencies, even grieving families were led in circles across the Indian Ocean until they gave up. But I didn't give up, because once you've spent your life inside the machine, you recognize its rhythm, the way it erases, the way it distracts, the way it edits truth in real time. And I know this. Someone in the deepest layers of the chain of command still has the complete data set. The raw, unfiltered satellite pings, the Diego Garcia logs, the real radar tapes, the communication intercepts. Someone who knows that a Boeing 777 didn't simply disappear in the age of global surveillance. I've spent the last decade trying to get that file, not because I need proof. I already believe it. But because the families deserve to know, not what the press told them, not what the official narrative spoon-fed them, but the simple, painful truth. Flight MH370 didn't vanish. It was taken. And someone still knows where it went. Flights over Kutahavadhu weren't common at dawn, especially not at 6:15 a.m. on March 8, 2014. The island's airport had been shut down for runway repairs since March 5th. According to official records, the only aircraft anywhere nearby that morning should have been a Maldivian Air taxi flight, but that wasn't scheduled to leave Mali until 7:30 a.m. Over an hour later, and it was supposed to be heading in the opposite direction, to the southwest. Of the Maldives lay nothing but 800 miles of open ocean, then the heavily restricted U.S. military base on Diego Garcia. As I began putting together a timeline, the process made my years in intelligence work feel almost amateur in comparison. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 hadn't just vanished. It had been redirected carefully, deliberately along a flight path designed to avoid radar, shipping lanes, and civilian visibility. It had slipped through the world's blind spots like a ghost, until by pure coincidence, a few islanders on a remote atoll looked up and saw something no one was ever supposed to witness. But the bigger question was why? Who would go through the trouble of making the commercial airliner disappear, killing 239 people in the process? The answer, I realized, didn't lie in the plane, it lay in the people on board. As any intelligence analyst knows, the truth often hides just beneath the surface of apparent randomness. Patterns form in the noise if you know where to look. And MH370's passenger list contained several such patterns that should have raised red flags long before takeoff. 20 of the passengers worked for Freescale Semiconductor, a Texas-based firm that specialized in microprocessors and embedded systems, critical tech for advanced radar, stealth, and defense applications. They weren't just flying to Beijing for a trade show. They were carrying sensitive data laptops loaded with proprietary software, internal documentation, and in at least one case, early prototype hardware. Among them was Dr. Chen Wei, the lead engineer on an internal Freescale program called Project Mirror. Its aim? To develop real-time radar signature manipulation, essentially making objects appear invisible to radar systems. Then there were the 4 passengers traveling under stolen passports, Austrian and Italian documents. Interpol quickly confirmed that the passports had been stolen years earlier, and while the identities of the thieves were identified within days, the actual individuals who used those passports to board MH370 were never conclusively identified. They'd purchased their tickets with cash through a travel agent in Bangkok, and there was no electronic trail beyond the bare-bones booking information. But the most concerning passenger on that list was someone who barely raised an eyebrow at the time, a man named Yenlo. According to the manifest, Yenlo was a software consultant flying from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. But that wasn't true. Through sources I can't name and channels I won't explain, I learned that Yenlo was actually a former cyber analyst with the Chinese military. He'd been working on quantum encryption algorithms for the PLA's third department, their version of the NSA, and 6 months before the flight, he'd quietly approached the CIA through an intermediary. He wanted to defect. Yenlo claimed to have developed breakthrough technology, quantum-resistant encryption algorithms that, if real, could render nearly all Western surveillance and code-breaking tools obsolete within a decade. He was offering to trade that research for asylum and a guarantee of safety for his family back in mainland China. But things didn't go as planned. Negotiations stalled in December 2013 over disagreements about money and his family's relocation. Meanwhile, what Yenlo didn't realize was that the NSA had already picked up on his outreach. Specifically, the Special Collection Service, operating out of the U.S. Embassy in Kuala Lumpur, had been intercepting his messages since at least October. They'd built a full profile of him, his habits, contacts, and the scope of his research. Spent weeks reconstructing the intelligence mosaic that would have existed in the days before MH370 disappeared. What I uncovered was staggering. Freescale's biggest institutional investor was a private equity firm called Jacob Partners. Sounds harmless until you realize that Jacob Partners has been quietly linked to DARPA funding. Several classified documents point to the firm's involvement in steering defense research, especially into stealth and radar systems. So those 20 Freescale employees weren't just going to a tech conference. They were, in all likelihood, transporting critical research experimental designs for making aircraft undetectable. And Yenlo? If his encryption theories were sound, they could have turned the global intelligence balance on its head. China would gain the ability to communicate in complete secrecy. The NSA's billions in cryptographic infrastructure would become worthless overnight. Taken together, the plane carried more than just passengers. It carried intellectual weapons tools that could reshape the global surveillance game, compromise national security protocols, and potentially shift military power in unpredictable ways. I kept coming back to the same sickening thought. This wasn't an accident. Flight MH370 didn't just go missing. It was removed from the sky, from the record, from history. Not for what it was, but for who and what it carried. Agencies couldn't even detect it, let alone break through it. The alignment of factors was too precise to write off as coincidence. Think about it. On a single flight departing from a region with notoriously thin air traffic oversight, heading straight toward Beijing, two major intelligence threats were seated together. The Freescale engineers and Yenlo, both carrying sensitive, possibly game-changing tech. If they made it to Chinese soil, their research would vanish into the black depths of military R&D, and with it, a potential seismic shift in global intelligence. Balance, but something else kept nagging at me, another pattern I couldn't ignore. About 3 weeks before MH370 disappeared, a satellite image came across my desk. Routine pass, commercial provider. The satellite had captured a Boeing 777 parked at Diego Garcia. That caught my attention. It wasn't unusual for US military aircraft to be there, but this? A 777? That was different. The plane was sitting inside a maintenance hangar one, usually reserved for highly sensitive military equipment. Through some less than legal channels, I got access to higher resolution versions of those satellite images. What I saw made my chest tighten. The antenna array on that aircraft, it was identical to the configuration, specific to MH370. Not similar, exact. Whoever was behind this hadn't scrambled at the last minute. They had been preparing for weeks, maybe months. Assets had been deployed, flight paths cleared, infrastructure quietly put in place. All they needed was a flight with the right mix of passengers, men and women whose disappearance could serve multiple national security goals in one fell swoop. This wasn't a crash. This wasn't pilot suicide. This wasn't some half-baked terrorist plot. Flight MH370 had been intercepted by professionals, the kind who didn't leave traces, the kind who worked in shadows most people refuse to believe exist. Intelligence services with nearly unlimited resources and no official accountability. And the scariest part? The operation didn't end when the aircraft vanished. That was just the beginning. In November 2015. A year and a half after MH370 went missing, I received an encrypted email from an unknown address. The message was simple, a phone number and 2 lines of text. Hangar 7, Test Flight 847. It took me 10 minutes to process what I was looking at. Hangar 7 was located at Boeing's Everett plant in Washington, used strictly for experimental aircraft systems, and Test Flight 847. I hadn't heard that code in years. Back in 2010, during a secure briefing, that name was associated with a classified project aimed at developing optical camouflage, technology that could make aircraft effectively invisible. I called the number. Mr. Rhodes? The voice said. Southern accent, nervous, middle-aged. My name is Marcus Webb. I used to work for Boeing. I think we need to talk. We met 3 days later at a diner off I-5 near Everett. Webb looked like a man worn down to the bone. Pale, wiry, constantly glancing at the door. He nursed a black coffee like it was the only thing tethering him to the present. I worked avionics for 15 years, he said, mostly comms and radar. In 2013, I got pulled into something ... off the books. We called it Ghost Protocol. That's all they told us. He stirred sugar into his coffee with trembling fingers. They said we were building stealth systems for next-gen military transports. Not just radar absorption, this was full-spectrum masking. Radar, optical, thermal. According to Webb, the tech worked by layering a grid of sensors and emitters along the aircraft surface. These devices would detect incoming radar signals and send back scrambled reflections, canceling the signature. Simultaneously, The visual camo system scanned the sky and terrain and projected that imagery onto the aircraft's skin in real time like a chameleon in the clouds. We ran 2 tests, he said quietly. First one worked partially. Cut our radar sig by 60%. The optics were patchy but promising, about 40% camo effectiveness. The second test. He paused, staring into his mug like it held the past. The second test, the plane just disappeared. From everything. Radar, optics, even GPS, we lost it for 8 minutes. A full-size Boeing 777, gone, in controlled airspace. When the aircraft reappeared, its systems were glitching, severe avionics malfunctions, unresponsive instruments. The official explanation was cascading systems failure. But the test was never repeated. Ghost Protocol was immediately mothballed. Everything locked away under levels of clearance Webb never had access to. Webb had kept something. Schematics, logs, enough technical notes to know. What he'd seen wasn't science fiction. I knew something wasn't right when they made. US signed fresh NDAs 6 months after the project shut down, he said. Then MH370 vanished. I started making connections. His eyes were haunted now. It was the same aircraft, the same tech, same model. They finished what we started, and they used it. He slid a flash drive across the table. I don't have everything, but what I have, it'll make your skin crawl. I didn't sleep for 3 nights after reviewing the data, because it confirmed what I had feared all along. Flight MH370 didn't just disappear, it was removed. Flight path anomalies, radar blind spots, the sudden disappearance. It was all too familiar, eerily similar to our second test run. Webb had a theory. He believed the Ghost Protocol technology, our classified invisibility system, had been covertly installed on Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, maybe during scheduled maintenance, or maybe through a darker, more covert operation. Either way, he was convinced the aircraft hadn't just dropped off radar because someone flipped off the transponder. It was electronically erased, he told me, eyes bloodshot, voice stretched. Thin, the whole damn plane. I blinked, trying to make sense of the implications. But why? If someone wanted the passengers or their research, why not just take them quietly in Beijing? Why hijack a whole flight with the world's attention? On it, Webb gave a hollow laugh, the kind that carries no humor, just exhaustion. Because this wasn't about stealing data, it was a test. A live global demo. He leaned forward, fingers trembling slightly as they drummed against the table. They wanted to see if they could make a commercial airliner disappear, completely. In real time, with the entire world watching. My stomach tightened. You're saying it was a field test? Exactly. If Ghost Protocol works on MH370, it works on anything. Air Force One, enemy bombers, civilian jets carrying journalists, dissidents, whistleblowers. Anyone. Anywhere. He explained how it worked. Boeing had quietly developed a system called the uninterruptible autopilot, a safety feature meant to override the cockpit and allow ground control to take over during hijackings. But someone had modified it. Now it could receive instructions via satellite uplink, turning the aircraft into a remote-controlled drone, thousands of miles from its pilots. They flew it to Diego Garcia, Webb said with unnerving confidence, landed it, offloaded the passengers, processed them, then either destroyed the plane or stashed it somewhere secure. I just sat there stunned. And the debris? Planted, he said flatly. Dropped from cargo planes or submarines. Just enough to keep the official story alive that it went down in the Indian Ocean. I looked him in the eye. Why are you telling me this? You know what you're risking. His face was pale, drawn. His voice cracked as he spoke. Because they're not done. MH370 was the beginning. I've seen the Ghost Protocol production schedules. They're ramping up. This isn't one-off tech. They're building enough for global deployment, civilian, military, maybe even spacecraft. They're planning to erase things, people, planes, entire missions whenever it suits them. He reached into his coat and handed me a flash drive. This has everything. Ghost protocol specs. Maintenance logs from the Boeing facility where they built it. Satellite images of a 777 parked at Diego Garcia before and after March 2014. I didn't touch the drive right away. What if something happens to you? He nodded like he'd already accepted it. You share it. Get it into the right hands. 2 weeks later, Marcus Webb was dead. They said it was an accident. A single vehicle crash on a clear, dry night. His car veered off the road and slammed into a tree. No skid marks. No mechanical failure. Just a wreck 2 miles from his house on a road he'd driven for 15 years without incident. I kept my word. On July 29, 2015, the first piece of MH370 debris turned up on Reunion Island, a small French territory, 2,300 miles from the supposed crash site. It was a flaperon, part of the plane's wing. Malaysian officials, French investigators, even Boeing, all confirmed it belonged to MH370. But something wasn't right. Ocean current models predicted that wreckage from the southern Indian Ocean could reach Reunion in about 12 to 18 months. MH370 had vanished 16 months earlier, dead center of the range. On the surface, the timeline fit, but the flaperon itself, DIDN single quotes T. Marine biologists who examined it found barnacle growth that didn't add up. Some were too mature for just 16 months at sea. Others showed odd salinity exposure, as if the fragment had spent time in different water bodies. One section seemed scraped clean, then regrown under different conditions, like someone had tried to manipulate the appearance of natural drift. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a marine biologist at the University of Cape Town, wasn't involved in the official investigation, but she published an independent analysis of the flaperon photos. Her conclusions were alarming. The world's curiosity while burying the truth deeper than the ocean. Dr. Mitchell's paper had laid the groundwork. The evidence suggests the flaperon had been exposed to multiple marine environments. She wrote, "The barnacle growth isn't natural. It points to storage in different saltwater tanks or enclosed bodies, not a single long drift through open ocean currents." Her peer-reviewed study went live for 6 weeks, long enough to stir quiet, unease among marine biologists, before it was pulled offline without explanation. The journal offered no comment. Mitchell declined all interviews, but that flaperon was just the start. Between 2015 and 2018, over 30 more fragments were reportedly found, scattered along African coastlines, Mozambique, Madagascar, South Africa, Tanzania. Wing flaps, engine cowls, cabin panels, luggage, even a child's backpack. On the surface, the narrative seemed solid confirmation that MH370 had broken apart mid-air or upon impact, swept by the vast southern Indian Ocean, its remnants cast ashore by time and tide. But something gnawed at me. The timing, the locations, the details hidden in forensic reports that never made it to the press. I obtained copies of several internal analyses, restricted documents from maritime recovery teams, accident investigators, even customs agencies who'd quietly logged anomalies. What I found changed everything. Many of the fragments had markings no ocean crash could cause. Clean tool cuts, not torn or jagged edges, but deliberate, machined separations. Some showed scorch marks near seams, suggesting heat exposure. Others had corrosion patterns inconsistent with saltwater. In fact, some bore mineral traces only found in freshwater lakes or artificial reservoirs. And then there were the barnacles. Isotope testing on their calcium. Shells done at 2 independent labs revealed something impossible to ignore. The organisms had grown in warm, still chemically stable water. not the unpredictable churn of the Indian Ocean. Their chemical signatures matched. Lagoon ecosystems like those surrounding Diego Garcia, the secretive U.S. military base tucked deep in the Indian Ocean. I started connecting dots. I mapped every reported debris discovery, overlaying them with known naval shipping lanes, undersea surveillance routes, and training areas used by U.S. and British forces. A pattern emerged. In October 2017, for example, local fishermen found part of a wing on the Mozambican coast. Just 48 hours earlier, satellite images had captured a U.S. Navy sub surfacing nearby, an area not known for routine patrols. That wasn't a coincidence. It was choreography. Similar events played out in Madagascar and Tanzania. Satellite logs showed naval vessels in position, followed by debris discoveries within days. The timing was too perfect. The currents too accommodating. It looked like staged placement. Then came the call. In early 2018, a man reached out to me through encrypted email. A former U.S. Navy diver. He didn't share his name, just a code name he used for secure comms. Sandglass. We spoke through an encrypted voice channel. No recordings, no transcripts. Just raw testimony. He claimed he'd participated in classified deep water salvage drills in 2016 and 2017. That's what they called them, he said. But it wasn't salvage. We were deploying debris airplane parts into the ocean from submarines at specific locations. Why? I asked. They told us it was ocean current research. Climate modeling stuff. Bullshit, honestly. You don't use real fuselage panels and luggage to model currents. And you sure as hell don't bring marine biologists to glue barnacles on them. I remember just sitting there, phone pressed to my ear, pulse pounding. Wait, they planted marine life on the parts? Yeah, he said. Barnacles, algae, even corrosion layers, all synthetic. Some real growth, some fake. They had aquariums on board. Controlled salinity, temperature variations. Simulating months or years of drift. He said they'd been given strict instructions. Handle the debris gently. Don't ask about serial numbers. Some of the identification tags had been filed down or scratched out. Others had fake markings applied, just enough to mimic MH370. Then he gave me GPS coordinates for several drop sites. I compared those to known debris finds. They matched exactly what the world saw as random discoveries, washed up fragments from a plane lost at sea were, in fact, components of a cover-up. Each fragment carefully staged, chemically aged, and strategically deployed to maintain the illusion of a tragic accident. Whoever orchestrated it had access to military assets, oceanographic experts, even forensic specialists. They didn't just want the world to believe MH370 crashed. They needed it. Because if people stopped believing that, they'd start asking the real questions. The world had already grown numb from 5 years of silence, unanswered questions, and painful ambiguity surrounding the disappearance of MH370. Investigators had combed through oceans of data and grieving. Families had clung to fading hope. But what happened in March 2019 shattered what little piece I had left. It came in an unmarked package, no name, no return address, just a padded envelope left on my doorstep. Inside, a single sheet of printer paper, slightly curled at the edges. On it, a photograph. Grainy, color muted, but unmistakable. It showed the inside of a military-grade hangar-bare concrete flooring, a steel overhead crane system, and harsh, fluorescent lighting. In the center, partly obscured by camouflage netting, sat a large aircraft. The silhouette made my chest tighten. A Boeing 777. No tail number. No airline markings. But my eyes locked on the shape of the winglets, sharper, curved a certain way, and the unique antenna array mounted along the fuselage. Even faint scuff marks near the forward cargo door matched images I had archived of MH370. I wanted to believe I was wrong. I needed to be, but the background confirmed what I feared. The structural layout, the texture of the coral-based concrete floor, the industrial rigging, every detail matched the architectural schematics I had for the maintenance bays at Diego Garcia, the U.S. military base in the Indian Ocean, one of the most secure installations on Earth. For days I didn't sleep. I sent the photo to analysts I trusted, digital forensics experts, aviation engineers, former intelligence officers. None of them could prove it was a forgery. Every frame, every angle, every shadow checked out. It was real. MH370 hadn't been destroyed. It had been hidden. I remember standing in my kitchen, clutching the photo, barely able to breathe. If the plane was intact, maybe the passengers were too. Maybe they were imprisoned, alive, somewhere far beyond the reach of international law. It meant the debris that had washed ashore in the years following was planted to mislead search efforts. To close the book prematurely. It meant Ghost Protocol wasn't theoretical. It was operational. I backed up everything. Files, timelines, metadata comparisons. I saved them to encrypted drives and made physical copies. I began contacting everyone I could: journalists, former colleagues, documentary filmmakers, people who could carry this truth if I suddenly COULDN, single quotes T. Then came the knock. It was a Tuesday morning in April. 2 men in charcoal suits stood at my door. Clean-cut, polite, and utterly unreadable. They claimed to be with the FAA Federal Aviation Administration, but their IDs didn't match any official format I'd ever seen, and I've seen plenty. They told me calmly, without threat, that my investigation had been deemed a risk to national security, that all my materials, computers, notes, drives were being confiscated under the Patriot Act. They said my findings were now classified, and that further pursuit of this matter could constitute a violation of the Espionage Act. Life imprisonment was mentioned once, like a polite warning. I was told to remain silent, to avoid press, to report any foreign contact. They left with everything. 3 days later, I found a second package in my mailbox. Smaller, unmarked, except for one thing. A flash drive labeled in block letters. 370 wasn't the first. What I saw on that drive still haunts me. High-resolution satellite imagery, some of it more than 10 years old, showing plain civilian aircraft sitting intact at isolated locations around the world. Some in the Pacific, others near the Arctic Circle. A few airstrips. I couldn't even identify likely classified black sites. Each photo came with coordinates, timestamps, aircraft ID numbers, all matched with known cases of mid or disappearances, each filed away as tragic accidents, unsolvable mysteries. But here they were, intact, grounded, hidden. And then came the worst part, a folder titled Future. It contained satellite projections images, dated months or even years ahead of aircraft that hadn't vanished yet, planes still flying commercial routes, flights that, according to these documents, were scheduled for Ghost Protocol acquisition. Some of the facilities they were assigned to didn't even exist yet. Construction had only just begun. This wasn't just about MH370. That was only the beginning. This was a sustained program, systematic, methodical. Planes weren't crashing. They were being taken. Why? Strategic passengers, sensitive cargo, routes that could mask covert military movements, inconvenient truths buried in ocean lies. It was all connected. As I write this, I don't know how much time I have before they find me again. Or worse, before I vanish too. But I do know this. The families of the people on MH370 deserve the truth. Not the illusion, not the cover story, the truth. Even if it costs me everything. Relevance to something we've recently uncovered. Pack only what you need for 2 weeks. You're coming with us now. I was too stunned to argue. My access badge was replaced with a black one, no name, no number, just a faint silver triangle etched into the plastic. We left through an underground corridor I didn't know existed, bypassing standard checkpoints. No one spoke. The deeper we went beneath CERN, the more I felt the air change colder, drier, almost metallic in taste. They brought me to a lab I'd never seen on any facility map. It was located far below the main collider ring, carved directly into the bedrock. The walls were matte black, absorbing light unnaturally. Screens lined the far wall, streaming data that meant nothing to me at first. Frequencies, oscillations, field stress readings. But the further I looked, the more I realized they weren't monitoring particle collisions anymore. They were tracking something. Project Janus was not officially part of CERN's operational structure. It had its own staff, its own command chain, and security protocols that surpassed anything I'd encountered in military settings. They called it a non-collider division, but that was a lie. Janus was a collider just, not for particles. It was built to collide realities. The equipment in the room was decades beyond anything I thought existed. That shouldn't have been possible, even with unlimited funding. They were using something they called a harmonic stabilizer, which could isolate and amplify dimensional bleed from outside our spacetime. I watched in disbelief as they ran simulations showing brief, controllable overlaps between universes. Sometimes it lasted milliseconds. Other times, entire experimental chambers flickered into something else. At first, I believed it, that we were exploring boundaries, making history. But the night I saw the raw footage of one of the test chambers warping like a fluid ripple, then staying like that for 10 full seconds, I realized something had gone wrong. Inside that distorted chamber, something moved. It wasn't a shadow or a trick of light. It had form, mass, intention. Volkar began acting paranoid. He'd lock his office for hours, muttering in German under his breath. I once caught him burning printed graphs in a waste bin. We shouldn't have looked beyond the veil, he told me once, while staring at a monitor filled with unreadable symbols. The things on the other side. They noticed. I started hearing things. Not voices exactly, but a low-frequency hum. Always just beyond the edge of perception, like something resonating deep inside my bones. At night, in my quarters, lights would flicker in specific patterns, repeating sequences, never random. Once, when I was alone in the control room, the intercom buzzed and whispered my name, drawn out in a voice like dry wind over glass. Then the hallucinations started. Except they weren't hallucinations. People in the facility began vanishing. Technicians I had lunch with would be gone the next day, no explanation, their lockers emptied. When I asked questions, I was told their contracts had ended. But no. One leaves CERN like that, on October 28th. During a routine synchronization test, the harmonic stabilizers spiked uncontrollably. Every instrument maxed out. A pressure wave knocked 2 physicists unconscious. The test chamber began leaking light, not just visible light, but colors I didn't have names for. One of the researchers standing near the glass began screaming, pointing at something that wasn't there. His skin blistered in seconds, like he'd been exposed to hard radiation. He died before we could reach him. His body was removed. Number. Autopsy. No record. That's when I started writing this journal. I don't know who I can trust. Volkar has disappeared. The Black Badge personnel are taking over all experiments. They've begun isolating departments, restricting movement within the lower levels. We're not researchers anymore. We're test subjects. I've hidden the journal in a water-resistant pouch beneath the retaining wall near Lake Geneva. If you're reading this, it means they haven't found it yet. CERN isn't what you think it is. It stopped being a research facility the moment Janus came online. They've opened something, a door, a rift, a wound. And something is coming through it. If they find me, they'll erase me like the others. But if just one person hears this story and believes it, then maybe it won't have been for nothing. Please, don't let them build another collider. Don't let them finish. Janus. They said it was my publication on neutrino behavior during controlled field collapses that brought me to their attention. I remember the email arriving late at night, marked confidential with no return address. It simply read, "Report to Geneva. Project Janus has approved your clearance." At the time, I felt honored. Janus was whispered about in theoretical circles, rumored to be CERN's most classified project, something buried beneath layers of speculation and red tape. Every physicist dreamed of being chosen. I should have realized it wasn't a dream at all. It was the start of something much darker. The Janus facility wasn't part of any public schematic. It was located in a section labeled Subsector Gamma, only accessible through a winding series of biometric checkpoints and security scans. They checked everything: retina, voice, even something under my skin I didn't know they could read. Eventually, I was led to an elevator built into a reinforced shaft that looked more like a missile silo than anything academic. The operator said nothing, just pressed the button. It took nearly 8 minutes to descend. 8 minutes. As we went down, the walls shifted from familiar industrial concrete to something else entirely. Darker stone, almost black, embedded with strange symmetrical carvings. At first, they looked like cracks, but then I realized they formed repeating patterns, like mathematical glyphs etched directly into the surface. How deep are we going? I asked Dr. Volker, who had joined me halfway through the descent. Deep enough, he said without turning. The Janus lab didn't feel like a lab. There were no white fluorescents, no sterile surfaces or stainless steel. The lighting was soft and red, diffused as though the walls themselves were glowing from within. The air felt thick, warmer than it should have been, like being underground changed more than just the atmosphere. Banks of quantum servers lined the outer chamber, humming softly. Their interfaces streamed with unreadable data, some visual, some auditory. I could hear soft tones, notes that repeated in sequences, like a coded language. But it was the central display that stole my breath. A three-dimensional projection, suspended in midair, rotated slowly. I stared. It looked like a lattice of transparent membranes, stacked in layers like folded sheets of glass. Through each layer ran a singular thread of brilliant white energy, weaving through dimensions like a needle through fabric. What is this? I asked, stepping closer. Dr. Volker joined me beside the projection. The red light painted his face like something out of a fever dream. "This," he said, "is the Higgs field, but not the way you were taught to understand it." He touched a control panel. The projection shifted, zooming into one membrane. I saw ripples, disturbances bending around something invisible, like wind catching on a structure that shouldn't be there. "We thought they were simulation errors," he said. "Computational artifacts. But they appear across every test, every single one. And they're consistent?" I asked. He nodded. "They respond to our interactions. Watch." He tapped another sequence. The field began to pulse. A virtual simulation, a high-energy collision played out in slow motion. As the particles collided, the field didn't just create mass. It created patterns. Intricate crystalline lattice that seemed to form around the disturbances, almost like scaffolding. "Do you see the neutrino drift?" I murmured, pointing to the data on the side panel. "That's not noise." "Exactly," he said. "It's guidance." "Guidance from what?" "That's the question, Dr. Voss. That's why Janus exists." That night I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table in my small Marin apartment, coffee going cold as I sketched what I'd seen. The patterns, the field, the ... architecture ... We were taught the Higgs field gave mass to matter. But what I saw hinted at something far more complex, something conscious maybe. It felt like the field wasn't just a fabric. It was a structure. A network, and something was using it to communicate or manipulate. The rational part of me tried to dismiss the feeling. I'm a scientist. We work with evidence. But the evidence was precisely what terrified me. I began researching, digging through old papers, forums, even conspiracy theory blogs. Most of it was the usual garbage claims about opening portals to hell, summoning demons through particle collisions. But every so often, something real slipped through, like the fact that CERN was built on the ruins of a Roman temple to Apollo. Ancient folklore claimed the land was once considered a gateway to the underworld. Coincidence, maybe. But then there was the Logo 3 overlapping 6 South, stylized and denied by officials, but impossible to unsee once you noticed. A myth or a warning, and then the Shiva statue, a bronze figure of the Hindu god of destruction. Not hidden right there in the courtyard, dancers and destruction above the collider ring. I tried to rationalize it, symbolism, cultural inclusion. But the more I read, the less it felt symbolic. What truly unnerved me was a grainy video I found buried in a forgotten thread on an archived physics forum. Dated 2016, it showed a group of people, maybe a dozen dressed in dark robes, gathered near the Shiva statue in the middle of the night. One stood in the center, knife raised. The others watched. There was no chanting, no theatricality, just silence and motion. The clip ended before anything conclusive happened. But something about the stillness in that moment, the way the camera shook slightly as if the person recording was trying to stay hidden. It felt real. Too real. The next morning, I showed it to Dr. Volkar. He barely looked at it before chuckling. "Oh, that," he said, waving it off. "Old prank, staff do. That's sometimes to mess with the conspiracy nuts who track this place like hawks. Scientists have a sense of humor, too, Dr. Voss. We're not all equations and seriousness." But I had slowed the video. Frame by frame. I'd studied the shadows, the way one of the robed figures moved like they were leading something unseen. Volkar's explanation didn't sit right, because if it was a joke, why did the man in the center of the circle glance at the camera, just once, and smile? I froze the frame, heart pounding, eyes glued to the screen. I was certain, absolutely certain, that 2 of the figures in the video were people I knew. The one at the front, leading the circle, was Dr. Volkar. There was no mistaking the rigid posture, the way he held his hands behind his back. The second was Dr. Sarah Chun, the same woman who'd smiled and welcomed me to Project Janus on my first day, clipboard in hand like it was any ordinary research assignment. The next morning, I confronted Volkar. "I watched the video again," I said, sliding the screen toward him. "I think I recognize some of the people in it." He didn't look right away. Instead, he stared at me just long enough to gauge whether I was serious. Then he smiled, the same thin, practiced smile I'd seen him give to reporters during official briefings. "Dr. Voss," he said carefully, "I think you might be spending too much time on conspiracy websites. You've been working long hours, and I understand how easy it is to start seeing patterns where there are none. It's not healthy, especially for a scientist of your caliber." But I could see it in his eyes, that moment of calculation. He remembered being there, and he knew that I knew. That afternoon, I was reassigned. No warning, no explanation. I was told I'd be working more closely with Dr. Matteo Greaves, a rising star in the field of quantum field theory. Greaves was young, maybe 28, if that. But he carried himself with the restless energy of someone who couldn't turn their brain off. His workspace was chaos, notes everywhere, equations scrawled on glass panels. Even post-it stuck to his monitor like makeshift reminders of genius thoughts he couldn't afford to forget. "The math doesn't work," he said within 10 minutes of meeting me. "What math?" I asked. He pointed to a simulation on his screen. Higgs field interactions cascading in real time. "All of it, or rather our math doesn't work. What we're seeing down there, deep in the lattice of field, Behavior, it breaks the constants we thought were fundamental. He pulled up another window. This one was more visual data arrays translated into color-coded structures. To my shock, they looked like circuit boards. Not metaphorically, literally, like artificial neural pathways forming in the aftermath of particle collisions. It's as if, he said, his voice low, the universe was designed, layered, structured, like we've been living in the top layer of a machine, and never bothered to look beneath the casing. And you're saying every time we fire the collider, we're not just smashing protons, we're lighting up the wiring underneath the floorboards. He paused, then added more quietly, and something is responding. I stared at him. What kind of something? He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was barely audible. Consciousness. I blinked. You're saying consciousness is embedded in the fabric of space? No, I'm saying it might be the fabric. Think about it. What if consciousness isn't a byproduct of brains, but a force? Like gravity, like magnetism, something fundamental. My hands were shaking. I couldn't tell if it was from fear or exhilaration. Mateo, what if we're not just seeing these patterns? What if they're seeing us? He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. I've been thinking the same thing, and Lydia, I think they're trying to talk back. October 3rd, 2016, I've been trying to find the video again. The one showing the ritual near the Shiva statue. It's gone. Scrubbed clean from every forum, every backup link, even the mirror archives. Someone wanted it erased. But they didn't know I saved a local copy before it disappeared. I've been studying it obsessively. The timestamp on the video reads August 14th, 2016, 11:47 p.m. I cross-referenced it with internal logs I found from CERN's intranet, using a backdoor Mateo showed me. August 14th was the night of an unscheduled maintenance shutdown of the LHC. The logs show something strange. At 11:43 p.m., just 4 minutes before the timestamp on the video, there was a massive energy spike inside the collider ring levels. No test should have reached. Then sudden blackout. System shut down for 3 hours. No official explanation. 4 minutes between the energy spike and the ritual. I've watched the video frame by frame. There are 13 figures in the circle, all wearing black robes. 2 remove their hoods, Dr. Volkar, calm and composed, and Sarah Chun, her face lit faintly by the red glow from below. A third figure, I think, is Dr. Marcus Webb, head of theoretical modeling. He's holding what looks like a small leather-bound book, old, worn, its pages yellowed and fraying. But it's the fourth figure that chills me. They never remove their hood. Their movements are wrong, too fluid, too slow, like watching a snake move underwater. When they raise their arms, it's synchronized with the others, but off. Their spine curves in ways a human spine shouldn't. Their limbs stretch just slightly too far. It's subtle, almost subliminal. But I know what I saw. The video has almost no sound, mostly wind, static, but I've run it through audio filters. There is something, fragments of rhythmic sound, like chanting. Not in any language I recognize, but it follows the same interference patterns we've been seeing in the Higgs field simulations. It's as if the same intelligence manipulating particle drift is speaking here too. And there's more. In the final seconds of the video, the shadows cast by the figures stretch in the wrong direction, against the position of the light source. The bronze Shiva statue behind them, the cosmic dancer, is moving. Slightly, the limbs seem to shift. I thought it was video distortion, but I checked frame by frame. It's not. It's breathing. And just beyond the edge of the circle, near the foundation of the statue, faint red lights flicker from beneath the ground. They pulse in perfect rhythm with the chanting. The same red light that pulses in the Janus facility, far beneath the collider. I tried to show this to Mateo. I was about to bring him the video when the lights in my apartment flickered. My screen glitched, and the file vanished. Gone from every folder, my backup drive, the cloud, all of it. But I still remember every frame. I showed the video to Mateo during our lunch break yesterday. We sat in the corner of the Janus facility cafeteria, barely touching our food. His face drained of color as he watched the screen. His eyes locked on the hooded figures moving in eerie synchronization. Jesus Christ. Lydia, he muttered, voice low and tight. Where the hell did you get this? Does it matter? I replied, barely above a whisper. The real question is, what the hell are they doing? Mateo didn't answer right away. He kept staring at the video, rewinding parts, freezing frames, analyzing every movement. After a long silence, he spoke. I think they're trying to make contact. Look at the formation. 13 figures, spaced exactly. It's not just for show. That's a precision geometric layout resonant design. Resonant with what? He turned to me slowly. With whatever's been responding to our experiments. Lydia ... I've been digging into the quantum field anomalies we've been detecting. These aren't random spikes. The patterns, they're intelligent. Something's trying to get through. And this ritual, I think it's meant to help it. That night, I stayed behind at the Janus facility. Officially, I told myself I was catching up on data review. In truth, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were on the edge of discovering something huge and dangerous. The building felt deserted. Most of the team had gone home, leaving just the overnight techs monitoring the automation. Red security lighting bathed the halls in a low, hellish glow. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls, some seeming to move just a half-second too late, like they were struggling to keep up with reality. I slipped into the secured archives, my badge granting me access. I searched for any fluctuations in the field data that matched the timing of the ritual in the video. After an hour of combing through logs, something jumped out. August 14th. There hadn't been a random spike in the energy field. That event was no accident. It was a coordinated experiment, precise to the nanosecond. Collision energies had been directed specifically into Sector 9B of the LHC room. Right under the Shiva statue, I leaned in, heart pounding, pulling up data from the minutes after the event. Quantum field monitors across the entire facility had gone haywire. The system flagged something I'd never seen before: exotic matter signatures. Particles that shouldn't exist. Particles that lasted for less than a billionth of a second, but left trails in the field that lingered. Trails that matched the interference signatures from the Janus Project's core dataset. It was undeniable. The ritual and our research were connected. So focused on the screen, I didn't notice the lighting shift until the red glow around me started dimming. The change was subtle at first, then complete. The usual sterile fluorescence didn't come back on. Instead, the walls themselves seemed to glow with a soft ambient radiance that had no clear source. The air turned heavy. My skin prickled. I looked up and froze. Figures were standing at the edges of the room, just beyond the glow, unmoving. Their robes were the same as those in the video, dark and weightless. But the hoods, there was nothing inside them. No faces. Not even shadow. Just emptiness. A perfect void, like someone had cut holes into the fabric of space. I tried to back away, tried to scream, but nothing happened. My limbs felt locked, my voice strangled in my throat. A suffocating pressure pressed down on my chest, like the room itself was alive and bearing in. One of the figures stepped forward. I could feel its presence more than see it, like a hum inside my skull. It looked directly at me, and something cold and ancient curled around my mind. Then a voice, but not a sound. The words bloomed fully formed in my head. The threshold weakens. The pattern is nearly complete. Soon, the collision. Everything went black. Next thing I remember, I was slumped over my desk. Morning light poured in through the windows. The familiar whir of fans and humming electronics filled the air. My coworkers wandered in one by one, laughing, chatting about weekend plans like the world was still sane. But on my computer screen was a message I hadn't written, and no one else could have accessed. The Shiva statue stands directly above subsector Theta. Ask yourself why. I spent the rest of the day digging into facility archives, bypassing internal security logs and pulling old, half-digitized blueprints. According to the official plans, subsector Theta didn't exist. No mention of it. No construction records. But then, deep in a batch of engineering memos from 1984, I found something, buried in dry, technical language. Was a report. During initial site excavation, workers had uncovered a vast natural cavern, roughly 1.4 kilometers below ground, directly beneath where the Shiva statue would eventually stand. The cave system was sealed with reinforced concrete and steel, the report said. No follow-up investigations. No geological surveys. Just sealed and buried. But there were notes in the margins handwritten, probably by a project engineer. The cave exhibited unusual M resonance, and there were mentions of persistent low-frequency vibrations, sounds that made the crew feel watched. One entry mentioned several workers refusing to go back down after just a few hours inside. Official records said construction resumed ahead of schedule, but the cave system was never referenced again. That night, I met Matteo at a quiet little cafe, still trying to convince myself I hadn't imagined everything. But I could see it in his face when I showed him what I'd found. He already knew. Geneva. Far from CERN's walls, far from its cameras, far from whatever ears might be tuned into conversations like ours. Matteo and I sat on the terrace of a quiet cafe, the kind of place that felt almost too quaint to be real, deliberately normal, like it was trying to hide something. I turned my laptop to him, showing the message and the construction reports I'd found buried deep in the archives. He leaned forward, staring for a long moment. Then he spoke, just above a whisper. "Lydia, I think we need to ask ourselves something uncomfortable. What if CERN wasn't built to study particle physics?" His eyes didn't move from the screen. What if it was built to access something that was already here? I blinked. "You mean underground?" "I mean this exact location. The depth, the ring's geometry, the alignment with local magnetic anomalies. None of it lines up with what you'd expect from a purely scientific build. There were better choices, cheaper, more stable, with easier access and lower seismic risk. But they chose here. Why? I didn't have an answer." He reached into his bag and pulled out a worn black notebook, pages crammed with handwritten equations, sketch diagrams, and chaotic scrawlings that only made sense if you knew what to puzzle. "Look for. I've been working through this for weeks," he said, flipping pages, "trying to understand the math behind the quantum field responses we've been recording. Lydia, they're not random. They follow patterns. Not our physics, but a physics. Rules from something else. Like an intelligence. Maybe a civilization operating by an entirely different framework, and it's trying to reach us." I stared at the notebook. "You think it's coming from the cave system under the facility? I think the cave is a focus point. A place where the veil between our world and whatever's on the other side is naturally thin. The collider is being used to weaken it. Not to observe, not to simulate, to open something." He looked up suddenly, tensed out around us. The cafe seemed still, too still. I noticed a woman a few tables over, pretending to read a newspaper. She hadn't turned a page in almost half an hour. At another table, a man with a laptop typed steadily, rhythmically repeating the same line, again and again. Matteo followed my eyes and gave a slow nod. "We need to be careful," he murmured. "I think we're being watched." "By who?" I asked quietly. He hesitated. "Whoever's really running this. The people in the ritual video. They're not interns pulling a prank. They're coordinated, funded. They have access to internal systems we haven't even seen. This isn't a rogue department. It's embedded in the structure. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing the figure from the facility, its hooded face or lack of it. That terrifying absence, like reality had been hollowed out. I drifted into restless dreams. I was underground, vast, silent. A chamber, carved by time or design, I couldn't tell. Its walls pulsed faintly, inscribed with symbols that shimmered and twisted when I wasn't looking directly at them, like they were alive. Hiding their true form in the corners of vision. At the center of the chamber was a pool, black, reflective, perfectly still. I leaned in, expecting to see my reflection. But what stared back wasn't me. It had eyes like stars being born. A mouth that didn't move but whispered. Not words but understanding. When I woke, I was gripping my notepad. My hand ached. I looked. Down and froze. I'd drawn symbols. Dozens of them. My handwriting, my pen, but I had no memory of it. Yet when I looked at the shapes, I knew them. Not logically, not consciously, but somewhere deep, like a language I'd forgotten long ago. The symbols pulsed in the dim morning light. I was part of something now, something vast. And I didn't know if I had joined it or if it had used me to cross a line. And then came the day. Mateo vanished. October 18th, 2016. I hadn't seen him. Since the morning of the 15th, we were supposed to run a deep field analysis together. He'd been wired with excitement, manic with discovery. He barely blinked as he sipped cold coffee and pointed at the data streams on his tablet. "I think I've cracked it," he said, eyes wild. "The interference patterns, they're not just noise. They follow syntax, grammar. Lydia, it's a language." "A language?" I asked, still half doubting. He nodded, flipping to the next chart. "I've been feeding the waveforms into a translation AI. Told it to look for structure, not meaning. At first it spat out nonsense, but then one match. A 73% phonetic correlation with ancient Sumerian." I sat up straighter. "Sumerian? Not just any Sumerian. Cuneiform inscriptions tied to the Abzu, the deep waters beneath the earth. Realm of Enki, the gate to the underworld. Lydia, what if they weren't just myths? What if they were the best explanation ancient humans had for things they couldn't understand, scientific things?" I wanted to dismiss it. I really did, but I'd seen the patterns, felt them. And deep down, I already knew he was right. "Mateo," I had said quietly, "if you're right, what are we doing here?" He looked at me, a smile flickering on his lips, answering a summons. The translations weren't random. That much was clear. The quantum interference patterns, the ones we had written off as noise for months, weren't just data anomalies. They were forming words, ideas, and they weren't just any ideas. They lined up almost perfectly with ancient myths, Sumerian, Vedic, even pre-dynastic Egyptian. Mateo was the first to say it out loud, the collision energies. He told me one night over cold coffee in the break room, "They're not making new particles. They're acting like a handshake protocol. I think we've been picking up transmissions. And I think it's finally working." I remember the way his eyes looked when he said that, haunted, but electrified. That was the last real conversation we had. Later that same day, he volunteered to monitor the overnight collision sequence. It was a boring task, mostly watching readouts and flagging anomalies while the system did the real work. I offered to stay with him, but he waved me off with a tired grin. "Go home, Voss. Get some sleep. I've got this." The next morning, his station was empty. Coffee mug still warm, computer still logged in. His notebook lay open beside the console, but the equations, God, the equations. The first half of the page was coherent. Then the symbols started to twist, like they were written in a rush, or by someone unraveling mentally. Then came drawings. Not doodles-glyphs. No sign of Mateo.security. Footage showed him taking the elevator at 2:47 a.m. down to a location listed only as subsector. No number, no code. Officially, it didn't exist. But the system logged his keycard entry, and not just once. According to access records, Dr. Matteo Greaves was still moving through the Janus facility for hours after he vanished. Still running simulations, still accessing terminals. His final activity was logged at 6:23 a.m. He pulled data from the deep archive. The old geological surveys. The ones from when CERN was first being built. After that, nothing. I've tried to find him. Every time I push for answers, I get the same line. Dr. Greaves has been reassigned to a classified project and is unavailable for consultation. The words are always the same, like someone's reading off a cue card. When I confronted Dr. Volkar, the project lead, he gave me a look I can't forget. Not annoyance, not anger, fear. Dr. Voss, he said carefully, I strongly advise you to concentrate on your current assignments. Speculation about your colleagues' whereabouts is discouraged. The work we're doing here is more important than any individual. He didn't need to say more. I could feel the weight of the warning, but something isn't right. I know it. The way people look at me now, like they're waiting for something. There's pity in their eyes, and something else. Like they're afraid to get too close. I stopped going home. I've been living out of the library annex, pouring through every text I can find on the site's location and the mythologies Matteo had been digging into. The overlaps are too clean to dismiss. Ancient Sumerians spoke of the Abzu realm beneath. The earth where reality bent, where consciousness existed without form, and where powerful intelligences lay dormant. They believed there were patterns, rituals, words that could breach the veil. It sounded like fantasy once. But now, the things we've been observing, they match. The symbols, the energy shifts, the patterns and the noise. There are references to geometries that function as dimensional gates, to sounds, tones that act as keys. Last night, I did something reckless, maybe insane. I used Matteo's KEYCARD. It still worked. I took the elevator down to subsector Theta. The panel lit up like it recognized me. No hesitation. No security override. Just a slow descent into something that felt very wrong. It wasn't like the other elevators. The drop kept going, way past where the Janus blueprint said the structure should end. First it was concrete and rebar. Then steel. Then something else. Older stone. Rough, weathered. It looked chiseled by hand or something close to it. Something pre-human. When the doors opened, I was in a corridor unlike anything I've ever seen. It stretched out in both directions, disappearing into shadows. The walls weren't just marked, they were inscribed, covered in flowing, almost liquid symbols. The same ones that had started appearing in my dreams. I walked left, drawn by a soft red glow pulsing from the walls. The symbols shimmered in my peripheral vision, constantly shifting, like they were responding to my thoughts. And the sound. I still can't describe it. A low rhythm. Not quite music, not quite machinery. A slow, wet pulse. Like something enormous was alive down there, sleeping or listening. The corridor opened up into a chamber that shouldn't have been possible. The ceiling arched hundreds of feet overhead, but it didn't feel like architecture. It felt like a cavern, grown or shaped by something with an alien sense of geometry. The air was thick, damp. It smelled of earth and something older, organic, but not rot. Memory, if that's a smell. I should have turned back. But something told me I was already part of it. That I had been since the moment I started listening to the patterns. And when I stepped into that chamber, when I saw what lay at its center, I understood why Matteo never came back. I don't know how to explain what I saw. Not yet, but I know this. We weren't the first to find this place, and whatever we've been talking to, it never stopped listening. The ceiling of the chamber vanished into blackness overhead, too vast to see, too dark to measure. The same living symbols covered the walls, but here they were more elaborate, woven into sprawling geometric spirals that pulsed faintly, shifting patterns in ways that made my eyes water and my mind ache. Staring at them too long felt like my thoughts were unraveling. In the center of the room was a pool, not of water, not of any liquid I recognized. It didn't reflect light, it absorbed it. It was a perfect, dense void, a surface of pure darkness that moved, even though nothing touched it. But the most disturbing part wasn't the pool. It was the figures standing around it. I recognized them from the surveillance footage, the ritual at the Shiva statue. Robed forms, faces hidden in shadow. But now they were solid, tangible. Not flickering images on a screen or hallucinations caused by sleep deprivation. They were real. They didn't move like humans. Their robes swayed too smoothly, as if underwater. And when I looked closer, I realized they weren't robes at all, more like layers of living fabric, shifting and merging with their skin. I tried to step back, but my legs wouldn't move. I wasn't paralyzed exactly, I just couldn't will myself to act. Like the command had been rerouted. Elsewhere. One of the figures stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. The hood tilted toward me. I expected to see a face. Instead, there was nothing. Just an opening into absolute blackness, depth without end. A void that seemed to look through me. Then, it spoke, but not aloud. The words arrived directly in my mind, bypassing sound entirely. The physicist seeks the vanished one. The vanished one seeks the threshold. The threshold seeks the collision. All patterns converge. I wanted to scream, to shout Mateo's name, to demand answers, but language failed me. The words wouldn't come. Instead, images and impressions poured into my mind, dense, layered meaning without sound. I understood, but not in the way I was used to understanding. The pool wasn't just a physical phenomenon. It was a point of intersection, a node where multiple dimensions touched. Here, the rules broke down. Consciousness could detach from form. Time blurred. Space folded. Matter and mind became fluid. The robed beings weren't cultists. They weren't even entirely human anymore. They had been changed, absorbed into the structure that existed beneath CERN. Their memories, their knowledge, even their identities had been preserved, but twisted. They now served something far larger than any one person or belief, and Mateo was part of it. I could feel him, his presence stretched thin across dimensional layers like a ripple across water. He was still him, still aware, still seeking answers. But he was no longer bound to a single body or a single mind. He had become distributed. The void-faced figure continued to pour information into my head. Too much, too fast. I could barely hold on to it. The truth hit like cold iron. The Large Hadron Collider was never about particle physics. Not really. It was designed, engineered, to generate just enough energy to weaken the boundary between this world and others. Every experiment, every paper, every breakthrough, all of it had been steering us here. The Higgs field. It wasn't just what gave particles mass, it was the skin of our universe. A membrane. And every high-energy collision was like a pinprick, tearing through that skin, letting something bleed in, something that had been waiting, watching. For millennia. It didn't want to invade our world. It wanted to merge with it. To become us. To wear physical form. Experience causality, emotion, touch, but without losing its quantum omnipresence. The ritual at the Shiva statue hadn't been symbolic. It had been the moment the fusion began. The figures I saw were the first. They were prototypes, integrated beings, part human, part dimensional intelligence. And they were just the beginning. The tiers in space-time were growing. More people would be chosen. More would be altered. Then, the figure's voice returned, heavier now. Final. The collision approaches. The pattern will be complete. The physicist will choose integration or dissolution. Then darkness. Not sleep, not a dream. Just absence. When I woke up, I was in my bed. No memory of getting home. No idea how many hours or days had passed, but on my nightstand was a device I'd never seen before. Small, metallic, humming softly. A quantum field detector, modified with tech beyond anything in our research labs. It was already active, tracking fluctuations in real time, and the readings, they were spiking, not linearly. Exponentially, something was coming. Fast. Reality was shifting beneath us, and the detector was recording the tremors. I wasn't just observing anymore, I was in it. November 1st, 2016. I found him, or what's left of him. Using his still active keycard. I've been returning to subsector Theta, night after night, mapping what I can, trying to decode the structure, the purpose, the intelligence behind it all. But every time I descend, it's different. The geometry moves, the halls rearrange, rooms vanish, others appear. It's alive, not metaphorically, literally responsive. The facility beneath CERN isn't just underground. It exists in SUPERPO, SITIO, and it's not part of our world in the way we think of place. The walls shimmer between phases of matter. The air hums with frequencies that shouldn't exist. Light bends in directions that don't make sense. Each journey deeper reveals truths I can't unlearn. This is not just a lab. Not just a basement level of the collider. It's a construct that touches other planes of reality. And it's waking up. Walking through those corridors felt wrong, like the building was subtly shifting around me, folding in ways that shouldn't have been possible. Corners didn't behave like corners, and distances stretched or shrank when I wasn't looking. Geometry had become a suggestion, not a rule. My mind struggled to keep up, but I pressed on. Somewhere deep within this impossible place, I found him. Mateo stood in what looked like a lab, but not like any lab I'd ever known. The equipment was alien. Crystalline towers pulsed with soft internal light, casting faint shadows that didn't line up with their shapes. Sleek consoles hummed quietly, their surfaces flickering with symbols I didn't recognize. There were machines built of glass and energy, floating pieces moving in precise, silent synchronicity. Data scrolled through the air like vapor, shifting. Each time I blinked, he turned to face me. He still looked like Mateo, same face, same stance, but something about him was different. His movements were unnaturally smooth, almost too perfect. Calculated. He smiled, but there was a flicker behind his eyes. A pause, like someone watching me from the inside. "Lydia," he said. His voice carried an undertone I couldn't place, like music played in a language I didn't know. It echoed, not in the room, but somewhere deeper in me. "I was wondering when you'd find your way here." "Mateo," I said carefully. "What happened to you? What is this place?" He glanced around, as if proud. "This is where the real work happens. Not simulations, not theories, real patterns, real intelligence. This is where we study the living architecture of reality itself." I didn't understand. I looked at the pulsing crystals, the quantum equipment that shimmered like heat above a fire. He stepped closer to one of the crystalline structures and touched it lightly. The surface responded, glowing brighter. "Each of these," he said, "contains consciousness. Not metaphorical, not artificial. Actual, self-aware consciousness, layered across multiple dimensions." I felt my chest tighten. "You're saying these are alive? Not alive like us, broader, more fluid. Their intelligence unbound by time or form. We've spent centuries chasing particles and forces, but the real secret isn't in matter, it's in consciousness. Quantum consciousness, the root layer of everything." I moved closer to one of the crystals. Inside it, light shifted and elegant, repeating patterns like a thought pulsing across some vast neural network. I couldn't look away. My mind began to tingle. Images, feelings, raw ideas started flowing in, not through language, but directly. as if the crystal was speaking in a voice older than language. "The intelligence in the collider data," I whispered. "It's not from another world, is it? It's from this world. From the structure of reality itself." Matteo nodded. "Exactly. The ancients weren't wrong. There are gods in the machine, but they're not divine. They're inevitable, emergent, the natural result of complexity and awareness folding back in on itself. And the collider? It's not just for smashing particles. It's a bridge, a resonance chamber, a consciousness amplifier." I followed him deeper into the lab, past machines that curved space around themselves like cloaks. The light in this part of the facility was redder, more intense. It made everything sharper. Sounds echoed longer. Colors seemed to bleed into each other, and the air itself pulsed, as if breathing. He stopped in front of a chair, if you could call it that. It was more like a throne, surrounded by a tight spiral of floating crystal modules, each one glowing to a unique rhythm. Above it, a hologram hovered, an image of a human brain, but not quite. There were extensions, loops, extra structures that phased in and out like ripples in water. "This is the interface," he said. "The Janus protocol, the integration point. You're talking about merging human minds with these entities?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Not merging. Evolving," he said. "It's not possession, it's growth. We're not being overwritten. We're being upgraded. They don't want to replace us. They want us to join them, to transcend our limitations. This is how we become something more." I stared at the chair. "You want me to go through that process?" "I want you to choose," he said. "Because that's where we are, Lydia. The choice is here now. They will come through. They're already manifesting. The only question is whether we stand beside them or get swept away." The crystals around us pulsed faster, and I felt it again, that presence. Something pressing against the edges of my thoughts. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't cruel. But it was vast. Cold only in the way deep space is cold, massive, and patient. And within that depth, something like concern. Maybe even kindness. I took a slow breath. The collision event.